My name is Laurel Davenport. I am 29 years old. The receipt was on the kitchen counter when I walked through the door. My daughter had set it there like it was nothing, like it was a grocery list or a permission slip, right next to her backpack and a half-eaten granola bar. It was a small white slip of paper, the kind that curls at the edges when it gets warm, printed in that faint thermal ink that fades if you look at it too long. The name on it was his. The date on it was 2 Saturdays ago. The hotel was 12 minutes from our house. I remember the smell of the kitchen when I walked in, garlic bread warming in the oven, the sound of the TV down the hall, some cartoon, the same one Ivy had been watching on repeat for 3 weeks. The evening light was coming through the window above the sink at that low autumn angle that turns everything amber and golden and soft. Everything looked exactly the same as it had every Tuesday evening for the last 4 years. I picked up the receipt. My hand wasn't shaking. That surprised me later when I thought about it. My hand was completely still. I read the name, Marcus Davenport, and the date and the room number, and the checkout time of 11:47 in the morning, and the total of $212. And I stood there in my coat with my bag still on my shoulder, and the oven ticking quietly behind me. And I felt something I did not have a name for yet. Not grief, not rage, something that came before both of those things. Ivy came around the corner in her socks, the left one half off her foot the way she always wore them, and she said, "Daddy found that in his jacket pocket when he was getting my coat from the car." She said it the way 7-year-olds say things, completely factual, completely unaware that facts can be weapons. He told me to put it on the counter so you'd see it. He told her to put it on the counter. I looked at my daughter's face, that round, open, completely trusting face, and I said, "Okay, baby, go wash your hands for dinner." And she went. And I stood there holding that piece of paper, and the oven timer went off, and I did not move for a very long time. Marcus was in the living room. I could hear him in there. The low sound of his breathing, the specific creak of the couch cushion when he shifted his weight. 22 feet away. I know it was 22 feet because I had measured our hallway once, years before, and when we were talking about getting a runner for it, and I had thought 22 feet. That's a good long hallway. I had been proud of that hallway. Now I was standing at one end of it, holding a hotel receipt, and he was sitting at the other end of it, and I understood for the first time that a hallway is also a distance between two people. I put the receipt in my coat pocket. I took my coat off, hung it on the hook. I got Ivy's dinner out of the oven, and the whole time I did all of that, I was thinking one single sentence, over and over, with no emotion attached to it at all. I need to understand what happened before I fall apart. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the end. The actual beginning. The part I loved. Inez, because you need to understand what I thought I had before you can understand what it cost me to lose it. I met Marcus Davenport at a fundraising dinner for the Sunrise Center, the autism support facility where I work. He was there with a colleague, seated 2 tables away, and he kept looking over at me with this expression I could not quite read. Not flirtatious exactly, more like someone who finds something quietly remarkable and is not sure if they should say so. He was 37 at the time. I was 22. I noticed the difference immediately, and I told myself it didn't matter. The way you tell yourself things when you are 22, and someone that composed, and that's certain of himself is looking at you like you are the most interesting person in the room. He introduced himself during the dessert course. He shook my hand, actually shook it, but formal and warm at the same time. And he said, "I've been trying to figure out all night what it is you do, because you have the look of someone who cares about something real." And that was it. That was the whole thing. Nobody had ever said that to me before, and I had not known until that moment how badly I needed someone to see it. Marcus was a civil engineer. He designed water infrastructure, drainage systems, retention basins, the invisible architecture that keeps cities from flooding. He talked about it the way I talked about my kids at the center, with genuine reverence, like the work mattered even when nobody noticed it. We talked for 3 hours that night. We closed the venue down. He drove me home and walked me to my door and said goodnight without trying to kiss me, which at the time felt like the most romantic thing that had ever happened to me. We dated for 11 months before he asked me to marry him. The proposal was not dramatic. We were in his kitchen on a Sunday morning. He had made eggs, the way he always made them, with too much butter and fresh chives from the little pot on the windowsill. And he slid a ring across the table without a box or a speech. And he said, "I want this to be the kitchen we always cook in. Say yes, and we'll figure out the rest." The ring was a simple oval sapphire, my birthstone. He had noticed months before that I always wore my grandmother's sapphire earrings on days when I needed courage. He had noticed, and he had remembered, and he had chosen accordingly. I said yes before he finished the sentence. The first 2 years of our marriage were the kind of years I had not believed were possible for me. Not perfect. We argued about money and scheduling and the way he left cabinet doors open, and the way I left lights on in empty rooms. But underneath all of that was something so solid and so warm that the arguments felt safe, like sparring with someone who would never actually hurt you. We bought the house on Grantham Road. We painted the kitchen a deep olive green that everyone told us was too dark, and that we both loved immediately and never second-guessed. I got pregnant 18 months in, a little sooner than we planned, and Marcus sat with me on the bathroom floor when the test showed positive and held both of my hands and said, "We're ready. We're already ready." Ivy came in March, and she had Marcus's dark eyes and my grandmother's nose. And from the first moment I held her, I understood that there are kinds of love that are not comparable to other kinds of love. They exist in their own category. They do not compete with anything. Marcus was a good father in those early years, not a perfect one. He traveled for work, and he got frustrated when he was tired, and he had a specific way of doing things that was not always compatible with the completely unpredictable nature of a small child. But he showed up. He learned. He was there for the 2 a.m. feedings more than he wasn't. He went to every pediatric appointment. He learned which stuffed rabbit Ivy needed, on which nights, and which particular way of tucking the blanket made her settle. I remember the sound of him reading to her in her room at night, set his voice low and unhurried, taking his time with the words, and Ivy's small responses, and the way the light would come under her door and make a thin gold line across the hallway floor. I used to stand in the hallway sometimes, just to listen to it, just to feel how good that moment was. That was the life I thought we had. The changes were so gradual that I can only see them clearly now, from the distance of 18 months of hindsight. At the time, each one seemed explainable. Each one had a reasonable story attached to it that I chose, consciously, to believe. The first thing I noticed was the phone. Marcus had always been relaxed about his phone. He'd leave it on the counter, leave it in the car, forget it in his jacket pocket for a whole evening without apparent distress. And somewhere around the beginning of last year, that changed. The phone went everywhere with him. Face down on the table, locked in the car when he came inside. And sometimes, this is the part I didn't let myself think about, he would take it into the bathroom when he showered. He'd never done that before. I noticed, and I told myself he was probably dealing with something stressful at work. He had been putting in longer hours. The department was short-staffed. There were always explanations. The second thing was the gentlemen's club. He'd mentioned going once before we were married, a work event. The kind of thing men in certain industries do when clients need entertaining. I hadn't loved it, but I hadn't fought him on it either, and then it happened again, 2 or 3 times over the course of maybe 6 months. And each time, it was framed as a work obligation, client relations. Nothing to worry about. He always came home the same night. He never seemed different. I told myself this was a thing that some husbands did, and that mine was trustworthy, and that the discomfort I felt was my own insecurity to manage. The third thing was the distance. Not dramatic distance. Not the kind where he stopped talking to me or sleeping in a different room. More like a thinning. Like something behind his eyes had gone somewhere else, and only a part of him was still present in our house. He would look at me, and I would feel looked at, but not seen. And we would have dinner and talk about Ivy's week at school, and the repair that needed doing on the roof. And I would lie in bed afterward feeling lonely, in a way I did not have words for, in a bed next to my husband, in the house we had chosen together. And the fourth thing was the medication. Marcus had been diagnosed with erectile dysfunction about 18 months ago. He had a prescription. He saw a specialist. He came home from the appointment quiet and embarrassed, and I had done everything I knew how to do to make him feel that it didn't change anything, that I didn't love him any differently, that we would figure it out together. And we had stopped having sex. Gradually, gently, in the way that things you stop doing eventually become things you no longer do. 9 months. It had been 9 months. I had understood. I had been patient, and I had told myself that we were managing something together. What I had not let myself ask, what I had pressed down so hard for so long that I had almost stopped feeling the pressure of it, was why, if the medication wasn't working for him, why he looked so tired in a different way now. Not the tired of insomnia or stress. Something else. Something that looked almost like relief. October 14th, a Thursday. He called at 3:15 to say he would pick up Ivy from school since he was finishing early. I said that would be wonderful. I said I'd have dinner ready when they got back. I hung up the phone and sat for a moment at my desk at the center, surrounded by the drawings my kids had made and taped to the walls, and I thought, this is my life, and it is a good one. I had no idea what was already in his jacket pocket, that he was sitting on the couch when I came in from the kitchen. The TV was on, a home renovation show, the volume low. He had his reading glasses on, and he was holding a magazine he was not reading. I stood in the doorway with the receipt in my hand. He saw it, and he did not look surprised. He did not look caught. He looked like a man who had known something was coming for a long time, and had decided, somewhere in the days between 2 weeks ago and right now, to stop trying to prevent it. "Ivy put it on the counter," I said. "I know." His voice was level. "I told her to." The magazine went onto the cushion beside him. "You told her to." I didn't know how to start the conversation. He took his glasses off, folded them, set them on the end table. "I thought if you found it first, it would be easier." I looked at him. I had loved this face for 7 years. The particular way his jaw was set. The small scar above his right eyebrow from a bicycle accident when he was 9. A story I had heard so many times I could tell it in his voice. I looked at that face and I thought, I am going to have to ask the question now, and the answer is going to change everything. "Did you cheat on me?" He said yes. Just that. One word. Not immediately. There was a pause of maybe 3 seconds that felt like the length of something I will never be able to name. But then yes, quiet and complete, without looking away. Who? A woman I met at the Meridian. The Meridian. The club. 3 weeks ago, we went to the Fairfield on Route 9. He stopped. It was one time. One time. The words came out of me hollow. "You have ED. You told me you have ED. You told me we couldn't." I stopped myself. Started again. "How?" He didn't answer right away. His hands were on his knees. I watched them. Those familiar hands. And I thought about all the things those hands had done. Held mine at the altar. Held Ivy the first night she came home. Fixed the kitchen faucet at midnight when the washer cracked and water was going everywhere. And I was panicking and he just went and got his tools and fixed it without making it a bigger thing than it was. "Marcus." My voice came out lower than I expected. "How?" "The medication." He said it quietly. "It works. It has been working for several months." I heard Ivy's cartoon down the hall. I heard the oven ticking. I heard my own breathing. "You let me believe." "I know." "For 9 months." "I know." "Laurel. You let me feel like something was wrong with me." I hadn't planned to say that. It came out of somewhere I hadn't known was sore. I thought I wasn't. I thought I had done something. Or that I wasn't. That's not what this was about. He started to stand, and I held up one hand, and he sat back down. "It was never about you." "Then what was it about?" He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a car went by. The cartoon played on. Ivy laughed at something, that particular high, bright laugh she has, and neither of us moved. "I wanted to feel different," he said. "That's the only honest answer I have. I don't know how to explain it any better than that. I wanted to feel different. 7 years. A house. A child. $212 on a hotel room on a Saturday morning. He wanted to feel different. Now before I tell you what happened next, if you want to hear the rest of this, like and subscribe. It only takes a second, and it means everything to me. Drop a comment with your location and your local time. I read every single one. Now, let me take you back to the hallway where I was standing, and to the question I hadn't asked yet. He asked me not to file for divorce. He said it before I had finished processing the first thing. The confession, the medication, the hotel room. While I was still standing in the doorway of the living room with the receipt in my hand, and Ivy's cartoon playing down the hall. He said, "Please don't file for divorce." And something about the way he said it, the order in which he said it, landed wrong. Not because it was the wrong thing to want him, but because it was the first thing he thought to say. Before I'm sorry. Before how can I make this right? before anything that was about me. The first thing was about what he needed me not to do. I didn't answer him. I went and I checked on Ivy, who was still on her bedroom floor with her stuffed animals arranged in a very specific parliament that I had learned not to disrupt. I told her I would be right back. I went into our bedroom, and I sat on the edge of the bed. His side, not mine. I don't know why. And I called my sister, Dana. Dana is 4 years older than me. She lives 40 minutes away in Carver Falls, and she has always been the first person I call when something is wrong. Not because she always knows what to say, but because she always knows how to listen. I called her, and when she picked up, I said, Marcus cheated on me. And she said, I'm leaving right now. And I said, no, stay home. I just needed to say it out loud. And she said, Laurel, I'm already in my car. She arrived 45 minutes later. She sat with Ivy while I got my daughter fed and bathed and into bed, reading her the last chapter of the book they were in the middle of, doing all of it with a steadiness I did not feel, and was performing entirely for a 7-year-old who noticed nothing wrong. Then Marcus and I sat at the kitchen table and talked for 3 hours. He told me everything, the timeline, the number of visits to the club over the past year, 7 times, not 2 or 3. He had been lying about the medication for 4 months. The woman's name was Chrissy. He had met her 3 times at the club, and in the hotel was the only time anything physical had happened. He said he believed that. He said he wasn't certain he believed it. I made notes on a legal pad while he talked. I don't know why I did that. Some instinct toward documentation, toward making things real and recordable, and not subject to later revision. I filled 1.5 pages in my handwriting, and then I stopped, because I realized I had stopped actually listening, and was just writing, to have something to do with my hands. I asked him to sleep in the guest room that night. He said okay. He stood up from the table, and he paused in the kitchen doorway, that same doorway I had stood in an hour earlier, and he said, I'm sorry, Laurel. I know that doesn't do anything, but I am. I didn't answer him, as I sat at the kitchen table after he left, and I looked at the notepad, and I looked at the olive green wall, and I looked at the little pot on the windowsill. The chives were still growing, still green, still growing. And I understood that I was now living in a different life than I had been living in this morning when I got up and made Ivy's lunch and drove to the center and told myself things were hard but manageable. Dana came back into the kitchen and sat across from me. She didn't say anything. She just put her hand on top of mine on the table and left it there. That was the night that broke me open. But the real breaking, the 3 a.m. kind, the kind that lives in your chest and doesn't make a sound, that came later. I want to tell you something about what happened in the weeks after that night, because I think it is the part that people do not talk about enough. Everyone talks about the confrontation. Everyone talks about the decision to stay or to go. Nobody talks about the in-between. That particular kind of suspended existence where you are still living in your house and still making your daughter's lunches and still going to your job and still sleeping 8 feet from the person who broke you. And none of it makes sense, and all of it continues anyway. I did not sleep well for 43 days. I know it was 43 because I started keeping a small notebook on my nightstand, and each morning when I got up I made a mark, the way people count in prison movies, and each morning I looked at the marks and thought, still here, still doing this, The 3 a.m. thoughts were the worst. You know the ones, in the thoughts that are too large for daylight, that can only exist in the specific darkness of deep night, when every defense is down and the mind goes where it wants to go. I would lie there and replay the conversation in the kitchen, word by word, and then I would go back further and replay everything I had not understood at the time, every late return, every downward-facing phone, every evening where he seemed present but wasn't quite. And I would try to find the moment where I should have known, the exact sentence or gesture that, if I had been paying proper attention, would have told me what was happening. I never found it. That was the cruelest part. Not that the signs had been invisible, but that I had seen them and explained them away, one by one, because I had trusted him more than I had trusted my own unease, and because I had believed that a man who noticed my sapphire earrings and remembered my birthstone and said, "We're ready. We're already ready." I had believed that man was not capable of this. There was a mug. I know that sounds small, but please stay with me. We had 2 mugs on the top shelf of the cabinet. The good shelf, the one we used for our own coffee, not the mugs for guests. They were pottery mugs, handmade, bought at a craft fair in our 2nd year of marriage. Mine was a deep terracotta. His was a dark slate blue. We had used those mugs every single morning for 5 years. 3 weeks after the confrontation, I reached for his mug by accident. I had my hand around it before I realized what I had done, and I just stood there, holding his mug, in the kitchen, at 6 in the morning, and something about the weight of it, the specific familiar weight of it, broke something open in me that the conversation and the legal pad and the 43 sleepless nights had not quite broken. I did not cry. I put the mug back on the shelf, and I got my own mug down, and I made my coffee. But I stood at the counter, and I drank it in a silence so complete and so heavy that it had its own texture, its own physical presence, like standing in water. That was the pause moment. That was where I lived for a long time. If you have ever discovered that the life you thought you were living was not exactly the life that was actually happening, if you have ever held something ordinary and felt the full weight of what it now means, tell me in the comments, how did you handle it? What did you do on the nights when the silence was too loud? I just want to know. And if you are still here with me, hit that like button, because the next part is where everything begins to shift. Here is the honest thing about the internal war, the one I am not sure I would have admitted at the time. I missed him. I did not want to miss him. I was furious with him, a fury that was not hot and dramatic, but cold and quiet and exhausting, the kind that lives in your bones and makes everything heavier. I was furious about the lies, about the medication, about the hotel room, about the $212 and the Saturday morning and Chrissy, about the particular cruelty of letting me believe for 9 months that I was the problem, that my body and my presence were insufficient, to act when the real answer was that he was simply choosing to take what he needed somewhere else. That fury was real, and it was mine, and I held on to it because it was easier to hold than the grief underneath it. But the grief was there. Grief for the man I had believed he was. Grief for the Sunday mornings with eggs, and the ring slid across the table without ceremony, and the voice reading to Ivy at night with that particular unhurried patience. Grief for the version of my life I had thought I was living. That grief did not care that he had lied to me. It showed up anyway, at inconvenient hours, and it was not interested in being rationalized. There were moments. I am going to tell you the truth, even though it is uncomfortable. There were moments when I thought about going and knocking on the guest room door. Not to forgive him, not to say it was okay, but because I was so tired of the silence, and because some part of me still associated the sound of his breathing with safety, and because 29 is very young, to have your entire architecture of trust dismantled overnight. What stopped me, every time, was thinking about the mug, the weight of it in my hand, the specific familiar weight of the lie. And then I would think about Ivy, asleep down the hall, who deserved a mother who modeled the thing I was trying to teach her. That what people do matters more than what people say, and that choosing yourself is not the same as choosing against everyone else. I called a lawyer on a Tuesday morning in November. Her name was Greta Halloran, and she had been recommended by a woman at my church who had used her 3 years before, and described her as the kind of person who makes you feel like the ground exists again. I made the appointment before I told Marcus I was making it. That felt important. To do one thing entirely for myself, entirely under my own authority, before I brought anyone else into it. I did not file that day, but I called. And making the call was the first moment in 43 days that I felt like I had done something rather than had something done to me. That was my small, conscious choice. One phone call. 11 minutes. And then I went back into the kitchen and made Ivy's lunch, and the morning looked the same as every other morning, and I knew I was different inside it, that the shift came on a Wednesday in early December. Ivy had a school performance, the winter concert, the one where the second graders stand on risers in the gymnasium and sing 4 songs while parents hold up their phones and cry. I had gone alone to these things before, when Marcus was traveling, but this was different. This was Marcus sitting 2 seats to my left in a folding chair, both of us watching our daughter in a headband with felt reindeer antlers, and the distance between 2 seats had never felt so specific. Ivy found us in the crowd after. She ran down the gymnasium floor in her patent leather shoes, and she grabbed both of our hands, one each, and she said, "Did you hear me?" And I was loud. And she looked up at Marcus, and then at me, with that open, trusting face, and I thought, I cannot let what he did teach her that love is something you survive, rather than something you choose. I don't know why that particular moment, on that particular Wednesday, in a gymnasium with bad lighting and a punch table in the corner, was the one that landed differently. But it was. Something shifted. Not toward him. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Not that. Toward myself. Toward the question of what I was going to build. I called Greta Halloran the next morning and told her I was ready to move forward. I was 30 years old by then. It had been 6 weeks. That's a life that changes in 6 weeks. But it's also a life that builds in 20 years. I was just beginning to understand which one I was doing, and I want to tell you something that happened in March, 4 months after that night, with the receipt on the counter. Marcus's company had won a significant infrastructure contract, the kind that required a specific type of environmental impact certification that I, as a result of my graduate coursework in environmental psychology and my 3 years of consulting work for the center's building initiatives, happened to hold. It was a professional certification in adaptive environmental assessment. There are fewer than 200 people in the state who hold it. I had gotten it quietly, on my own time, the year before, for my own professional development, with no particular plan for it. His project director, A woman named Sandra Ose called me. Not Marcus. Sandra. She had found my name in a certification registry. She explained the scope of the project, the timeline, the impending deadline for third-party sign-off. She asked if I was available to consult. I thought about that for exactly 2 minutes. Then I told her that I would need to discuss the scope of work and my current availability, and that I would need the consultation to go through a formal contract with my own billing address, and that given the professional nature of the arrangement, I would need full independence in my assessment, no influence on my conclusions from any party, including staff from the contracting firm. Sandra said that was completely standard, and that was fine. I wrote my assessment in 4 days, and I was thorough, and I was honest, and I delivered a report that was 53 pages and contained 12 specific recommendations for environmental mitigation. It was good work. It was some of the best work I had done. Marcus found out it was me when the contract came through with my name on it. His project director emailed him with my contact information to coordinate a follow-up call. He called me that evening. Not as my husband. We were 4 weeks into a legal separation by then, but with a kind of hesitancy in his voice that I had not heard before. He said, "Sandra tells me you're doing the environmental sign-off." I said yes. He said, "Laurel, you didn't have to." I said, "I know I didn't have to. I did it because it's good work, and I'm qualified, and I needed the professional credit. This isn't about you, Marcus, and my work has never been about you." He was quiet on the other end, a long quiet. Then he said, "You're right." And I said, "I know." And that was the conversation. 11 weeks later, the project received full municipal approval. Sandra Ose sent me a handwritten note that said, "Your assessment was the clearest, most rigorous document we received from any consultant on this project. I'd like to work with you again." I kept that note. It is in the drawer of my desk at the center, next to the sapphire earrings I wear when I need courage. Marcus's firm got the contract. He got the career credit. I got the professional reputation, and 3 subsequent consulting requests that, over the following year, would bring in more money than I had made in 2 full years of teaching. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be clear about that, and I felt steady. There is a difference, and the difference matters. And the last time I saw Marcus in a room that felt like ours was a Saturday in April. We were at the house. I had moved out by then, into a rental 2 miles away, and we were going through the last of the shared items before the formal division. Ivy was with Dana. The rooms were already thinner, already less ours, the walls beginning to revert to just walls. He was in the kitchen when I came in for the mugs. We looked at each other across the kitchen, that olive green kitchen we had both loved, that neither of us had second-guessed, that now belonged to neither of us in the way that it had. And I reached up, and I took my mug down from the shelf, the terracotta one, mine. His was still up there. I left it. "I'm sorry," he said. "I's not the same sorry as before." This one was quieter, older, the kind of sorry that has had time to understand exactly what it is apologizing for. I think I convinced myself for a long time that I was doing things for the right reasons, and I wasn't. "I know," I said. "Are you okay?" I thought about the question. I stood there in that kitchen with my mug in my hand, and I thought about it honestly. "I'm going to be," I said. "I think I already mostly am." He nodded. He looked at his mug on the shelf, and he looked at me, and he said, You were always the steadiest person in this house." I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. I took my mug, and I walked out. If you liked how this ended, not with a screaming match, not with a breakdown, but with two people who had failed each other finding a way to be honest in a kitchen, then subscribe and check the description. I have more stories just like this one waiting for you. Now let me tell you the last thing. I want to talk to you directly, now, the way I would talk to someone who called me at 11 o'clock on a hard night. There is something nobody tells you about discovering a betrayal late in its timeline, after it is already over, after the person has already made their choices and come home and set the receipt on the counter for your 7-year-old to deliver. Nobody tells you that the silence you were living in was not neutral. It had a weight and a temperature, and it had been changing you slowly, the way water changes stone. You were already adjusting to a life that was smaller than the one you thought you had. You were already shrinking to fit around an absence you had not been told existed. And when you find out, the first thing you feel, before rage, before grief, is a kind of exhausted recognition. Of course, this is what the distance was. Of course, this is why he seemed relieved, and why the phone went everywhere with him, and why he looked at me sometimes, like he was seeing me from very far away. The pieces fit. They had always fit. You just hadn't been given all of them. I was 29 when this happened to me. I worked a job I loved that didn't pay enough. I had a daughter who needed me to be okay. I had a marriage that was already, quietly, dissolving before I had any language for it. And I had this, a certification I had gotten for myself, for my own development, that nobody had asked me to get, and nobody knew about, and that turned out to be the thing that gave me back my professional life. Here is what I know now, that I did not know then. The things you do for yourself, the quiet investments, the skills you build in the margins, the mornings you get up early to study something you care about when everyone else is still asleep. Those things are not in addition to your life. They are the architecture of it. They are what remains when everything else turns out to have been built on something less solid than you believed. I think about the chives on the windowsill. He had started those from seed, Marcus, the spring of our 2nd year, because he liked having fresh herbs in the kitchen, and because he said that things that grow slowly are worth growing. And I had loved that about him, that patient, deliberate quality in that willingness to tend to something small and give it time. It took me until this year to start a kitchen garden of my own. Different window, different apartment, my chives and my basil and a small rosemary plant that is frankly struggling but still alive. I tend them in the mornings before Ivy wakes up, and I do it with the same patience he taught me, and I feel, when I do it, something I can only describe as mine. The things that hurt you can still teach you something worth knowing. That is not the same as saying the hurt was worth it. It wasn't. But it taught me anyway. And I am still here, in this kitchen that is mine, with a mug that is mine, and a daughter who is sleeping down the hall, and a professional life that no one gave me, and no one can take from me. And I am, steadily, imperfectly, on most mornings, okay. And the steadiest thing in any house is the person who decides to stay steady,